Hi all, I have another amazing game to show you. Shredder 13 against Leela in the Chess.com Blitz Cup 2018. So let's see what happened in this game. E4 from Shredder. We have Leela playing the Sicilian defense. Knight f3, d6. So very exciting start position. The Najdorf. So we go into the Najdorf with a6. Now Shredder chooses bishop g5. This is inviting, actually, after e6, f4, the poison pawn variation. So queen b6, hitting the so-called poison pawn on b2. Now, white didn't go into the most critical test here. White actually played knight b3, shielding that pawn. So the poison pawn variation, very, very analysed and trodden and double-edged. So this kind of situation has been seen in hundreds of games. So very, very sharp stuff. So anyway, knight b3. We have knight bd7, which puts the brakes on e5 from white. So that e5 break is important to make sure it's covered, like by the knight and by the pawn. Here we have queen e2, as though e5 is on the cards again. So queen c7, which actually, yeah, make sure everything is covering e5 again. g4, very committal. g4, black hasn't yet even castled. b5, we have a3, which prevents this b4 move, which would dislodge, which would loosen the e4 pawn, because sometimes black is building up pressure on e4. So that center square is a great subject of attention here. We have bishop e7, white castles queenside, rook b8, again not castling immediately, bishop g2, b4, a takes, rook takes. So very exciting opposite side castling scenarios, and often it's the player which gets the attack quicker. So white now plays bishop h4. This doesn't seem such a fast attack. Bishop coming here, getting out the way of the g-pawn. Black now castles, not worried about g5 particularly. Also the bishop is loose, by the way. You might think, is there a tactic here to exploit this loose bishop? Not really. If black plays knight takes e4, hitting that bishop, white can, for example, just take here and let that bishop go because of d6 dropping with check. Big advantage to white. So nothing to exploit tactically here. Leela castles, rook hf1. g5 was also possible, by the way. If g5, this position, as soon as white plays f5, though, that e5 square goes to a nice central knight. So that's not a big deal for white either. So rook hf1. And now you might think this is a strange decision in a way, knight c5, because that knight's not doing anything on b3. But it is actually kind of doing something in a way. It's shielding b2. And it seems Leela really wants to use this b file. Have a look at the pieces, how they're intensifying on the b file and during this game. So knight takes c5 was played. Another option for white is not to trade off actually on c5, but to play knight d4. It seems this might have something going for it. For example, I'll give you an example variation where knight d5, the knight could actually end up going to f5 in certain scenarios, and it gets a bit tricky. But in theory, it seems black's doing fine, or might even have a small edge. So anyway, it was taken off. So clearing that b-file route, that road to white's king, is that all-important b-file here. We have g5. Now the knight goes back to d7. So that pawn is kind of pinned actually now. Yeah, just g5 is not on the cards because of bishop takes h4, it seems. So we see knight a2. And just to give a flavour, what is actually going on here? If black had some extra moves, what would be the ideal moves? If you're playing the Sicilian, what would you play ideally as a plan. I was just sketching out, just giving white some token moves. Black might want to play this, and then d5 basically. This would be very dangerous. So there's big ideas of even sacking on b2 because of this bishop. Coordinate on a3 sometimes. So say this would be an ideal scenario, just crashing down to b2, and there's a pin here. I just wanted to know here what is black's actual plan. So it sometimes involves deliberating d5. So white plays knight a2, not giving black too much scope to do creative stuff. Rook a4, that knight is protected. Now bishop b7, knight c3, rook b4, knight a2. Yeah, it seems white is without a constructive plan here already. So actually Leela decides not to have the repetition, go rook c4 now. We have rook d3, which guards against an exchange sacrifice on c3. This could damage the central control and also the b file, of course. So as an example, instead of rook d3, just to show the carnage possible, say rook g1, rook takes, and actually just queen a3 is very, very dangerous, as you might imagine. This b file is just vicious with the queen cutting the escape square. So for example, bishop f3, rook b8 is just lethal. Check, winning the queen, winning everything. So the queen will have to go to b3 or something. Yeah. So it doesn't bear thinking about. So rook d3 essentially important now here. It's important to stop rook takes c3. So rook b8. We have now bishop f2 hitting the queen. The queen drops back, and now an artificial looking move, bishop a7. And this is one striking thing about this blitz game. It seems white players scattered. Pieces are going in all sorts of weird and wonderful locations, and there isn't the coordination or the alignment, you could say, of white's pieces, especially the rooks. Look at the rooks compared to black's rooks coming up, especially on this b file, because alignment adds weight to the combined activities of the pieces. And okay, we see rook h3 as if there is a weight of alignment here to h7, but in fact here now you can see there's already a huge weight building up on this c file to c3, and Leela implies that actually it's only that pawn holding c3, so why not undermine this pawn which is holding c3? So a5, it looks as though a5 not only does that idea of a4, a3 coming up, but also provides support for bishop a6 now, which is tactically dangerous because of the loose bishop, the weird bishop on a7. Should it really be there? So we have queen f2, at least protecting that bishop on a7, and resourceful because it's dual purpose. However, is this that dangerous, queen h4 here? By the way, if we look at queen h5, this can easily be parried by knight f8 holding h7. That's just a total time waste, and a4 will come now, and then bishop a6 as well, and it starts to get really nasty looking, with a3, and you can see all the alignment principles, basically everything sort of undermining c3 causes white to be mashed, basically. So we have queen f2, bishop a6. So is the queen actually free to move now even? Well, actually there's always knight f8, and it's holding at a7 anyway at the moment. So f5, we have knight e5. f6, this looks really aggressive, but Leela just plays bishop f8. And really, if white plays f takes g7 here, this doesn't seem to help much. If this is played here, then bishop takes. The knight is holding f7 against this f-file pressure. And also the bishop is again aligning with all of these pieces. The weight of alignment, that's another major theme, it seems, from Leela's games. The beautiful coordination here compared to the scattered nature of white's position. is really evident in these variations. Anyway, so bishop f8, we see rook c1, very passive, defensive. Rook b4, we have knight a2, and the rook goes to b7, gaining a tempo off that bishop. Bishop has to drop back. g6, sealing the king side, and the weight is taken off black's shoulders here now after a very clever pawn sack, just h5, or necessary as well, and just the king blockade. So that whole alignment here is just total waste of time. There's no weight to it, but look at the weight of black's pieces coming in now. Rook c3. It seems there's even two major solutions here available on move 36. Leela played knight c6, but in fact knight c4 seems possible. For example, this variation demonstrates that the pressure is quite crushing here. This is just absolutely crushing. Even this, the b file is just too dangerous. I'll give you an example variation where it's just absolutely murderous. This situation, for example, like this, there's no defending a2, and here on bishop takes c4, yeah, that's the strongest, because rook b2, there might be rook a3, but even there, this is also winning after queen d2, threatening rook takes and then queen takes c1. So say here, then this is also winning for black. So it's a really nice position. So it seems tactically knight c4 is possible, but knight c6, which hits this bishop potentially if the queen, if it wasn't pinned. So knight c6. Let's see, what does white do here? e5. We have d5 shielding that knight. King a1. Now bishop b4, nudging the rook away to unpin the knight. It's absolutely, as you'd expect, the a file is absolutely lethal, as you might expect. If taking here, let's have a look. A takes. This situation with b3 is lethal. For example, c takes, clearing that pawn, that form pawn away, doesn't help, because bishop d3, and look how, yeah, king safety is now a major issue for the white king. So, for example, this is just, we can either take the queen or even do this to crash through for a checkmate potential. Okay, so it's just absolutely hopeless, this variation. Let's look at it again. And if c3, it's even more clear cut. Just bishop d3, and then mating on the a file, for example, like this. So basically, rook f3. We have again another form of alignment on b2 now. c3. There's also an issue here concerning bishop d2, knight takes, and queen takes c2 as well. So there's pressure not just on b2, but indirectly after knight takes d4 on c2 as well. These are real hot spots now for black's pieces in this position. So we see c3, and I've looked at various alternatives at move 40, because this does seem committal. Isn't it weakening these light squares, inviting, you know, the bishop in for dinner and stuff, and the rook, you know, to occupy b3. So you might wonder, was c3 really necessary here? If we look at b3, this doesn't really help, because then a3 is the invitation. The invitation is slightly altered with bishop a3, and knight takes d4, queen takes, crashing through. If we look at bishop f1 to try and parry the a6, then knight takes d4, bishop c5, and then bishop takes f1, and then rook takes b2, crashing through. If we look at queen f2, now you're getting the flavour of this pain. Knight takes, and then bishop c5, unveiling the b2 pressure. And there's no point sticking around with queen c3, and there's things like d4 even. So queen d2, rook takes b2, crashing through. Another one, bishop g1, just for the record. Bishop d2, nudging the rook away from c2. Rook takes, and also just rook takes b2, because if rook takes d2 here, there's rook b1 mate. So it's a pretty vicious position. White's cracking. Weaknesses are showing up now. They're being weaknesses are basically breeding in white's position. So light square weaknesses. That's the next invitation. Leela obliges starts parking her pieces on light squares. With white's attack totally zero here. This is a total positional attacking masterclass. There's basically no alignment of white's pieces. No, there's no weight of alignment. But look at black's, by contrast. Huge weight is building up. Potentially there's A4, now an A3. And then coordination, yeah, it's just a nightmare. Bishop F1 is played. Bishop takes. And now Queen B7. Beautiful pressure. Look at this pressure. Huge on B2. So, and now A4 to gain A3. You get the picture. This queen, it's no point taking on A4 because then the A file is the disaster. You know, if we look at rook C2 A3, and this is just a nightmare. The knight's even coming into C4 here. Yeah, that's pretty juicy. And if queen takes A4, then we just use the A file. That's just the massacre there with queen A6. So we have queen G3. And now, this is just a really unfortunate square, actually. It seems, because the rook has got lateral pressure as well. So why here? Why here? Why queen G3? There's not too much to do, really. Yeah, it's A3's coming in anyway. It just seems extremely unfortunate. White's actually just busted here. It's just the huge pressure on the B file. I mean, the rook couldn't move away because the rook takes B2. There's A3 incoming anyway. Tokenly, okay, it protects E5. That's about all it does. But it runs into D4. Yeah, this is really nasty. And here we have bishop takes D4. Yeah, there's all sorts of horrible things going on here. On C takes, that wasn't even. It might be tempting to play C takes, but as well as exploiting the pin, there might even be things like knight B4. So we have just a piece being given up instead. Knight takes D4, and the amusing thing here is very, very amusing in a way. Bishop C5, just saying to white, you can have your piece back. I'm just going to take all of your dark square pawns now with my dark square bishop. I mean, I'm going to take all of them. You know, this one, potentially this one, and also this one for good measure. I'm going to take all your dark square pawns. So Leela gives back the piece, and we see this in action now in this position. So white gets the piece back at a huge cost. And there's also A3, by the way. And talking about alignment, again, every one of black's pieces is now, you know, charging towards that B2 pawn. So rook D2, bishop takes, one pawn drops, and another pawn drops, and a third pawn drops. Yeah, it was worth giving back the piece for that. White desperately now gives up the exchange and doesn't bother with rook takes F7 check here, just plays rook H1. If rook takes F7 check, this is pretty hopeless position. Yeah, this is going to be a hopeless scenario. This is what is happening here. It's just hopeless. So anyway, rook H1. So just the exchange up, and also, of course, 3 extra pawns also kind of help this endgame to make it easier. So this is just technique now, but we'll see how masochistic or not it is. So the rook's kind of coordinating, and yep, the piece drops here because of rook A3 threatening to checkmate. So a piece drops, a whole rook up, and it's to the death rules in this tournament. So plays to the death. A few more moves, queening for good measure, and then checkmate. So anyway, Leela makes the Sicilian defence look like a lot of fun in these opposite side castling scenarios. But I think what impresses me most visually is, the weight of alignment was huge over the black pieces here on the B file and the C file in many of the variations. Whereas White's attack was totally nullified with that nice pawn sacrifice. It did seem as though, although White's pawns seemed really aggressive earlier on, they didn't really open up any lines. And in fact, all F5 did, F6, was give this huge knight on E5. Which safeguarded a lot of points in Black's position. So Black's king was never really in trouble, and Black was able to sort of brew and intensify the pressure in a very visual, dramatic way. Hope you got something from it. Comments, questions, likes, shares appreciated. Thanks so much.